Today we're going to paint a watercolor tulip. Tulips are a really good flower to start with in watercolor because there's not much to them. And they have a really beautiful shape. So again, we're just going to first start with those guidelines. Careful not to overdraw, right? I'm doing the front petal, little side petal. And I know they can be beautifully open depending on what part of their life they're in. However, we're going to do a fairly closed one. And then there's always something in the back. It's going to help it make a little more three-dimensional feel. Okay, so I'm going to be using a flat brush first. Again, this is a decent sized flat brush. There's tiny ones, there's bigger ones. I don't usually give you a specific brush to use because I have some students that use gigantic brushes and do the most beautiful small detail with it, and some students that use small brushes and do wonderful, large, elaborate pictures with it. So find one that you're comfortable with. I will tell you that you'll know after the first few paintings that you do what size you're most comfortable with. This is probably my most common size. And then we're also going to use this round brush today. Okay, if you need to know, so when you look at brushes, the size of the brush is normally right here. This round brush is a size 4. So that's pretty standard for what I use. The small brushes I use are often a size 0. Just about this little guy right here. So we're gonna go, and if you notice, these bend really easy. This used to be straight, and now it's super bent, but I actually like the little curve on it. So I have a straight one and a curved one I use stuff for. Anyway, so we are gonna do wet on wet for the tulip. And always we're gonna do a brush check. Make sure that there's not too much water on there, that it's dripping. And put water up one side, a little bit on the bottom, and up the other side. And we're just gonna focus on this first petal. And we are going to use, here we go. We're going to use a little bit of alizarin crimson, which is a nice pink color. And I use it in some of my other demos, so depending on if you're following along, you might already have this out on your palette. And I'm just going to put a little couple soft little areas of it. Keeping it nice and light. We want to get this nice roundness to the petal. And to do that, you want to keep the middle area always lighter than the outer area. It'll give it a 3D feel. So I added dark on the outside, and now I'm just pulling water in towards the middle. Lighter as I go. And I'm just wiping off my brush. This actually is what I'm wiping onto. You can use paper towel as a great thing to dry your brush off on. This happens to be a piece of cardboard. Well, it's like cardboard. It's actually the back of a dry erase board that I often use because it absorbs pretty well. And I tend to use things I find around the house because, well, it's just more convenient. Okay. Now you notice I started the second petal right here. Still using the same color. We're going to paint this flower in one color. Today's demo is specifically to help you see what the paint can do when you put more and less water and more and less pigment in. And it's really beautiful the way that you can get a color shift. So what we don't want is to have these two petals touch yet because the color will just bleed in. So I'm going to keep this little white strip right here for now. And I'm just going to go up the edge. This is also great for brush control. You'll find the more that you do watercolor, the closer you're going to be able to get to the middle petal and still have this white little section. And you'll notice I did this wet on wet, right? I put water down and then I used a wet brush. And this part over here I'm doing dry, and I'm doing that because I want to control the paint a little bit more. And hopefully you can kind of start to see where I'm going with this petal right here and the shape of the tulip in general. And I'm going to take a little bit more paint, and I actually started mixing a little bit of blue with my crimson, so it's giving me a little bit of a purple color. I'll put a list of the paints that I use, I'll put it at the beginning of the video so you can follow what I usually do, but I'm also going to tell you, you don't have to use those particular colors. If you have a set, use what you have. That's why I often just say blue or crimson or something that's, you know, fire engine red, because it might be called something else and it's fine. Don't go out and buy a bunch of paints just because, you know, one demo used it. Learn to use watercolor first, then figure out what colors you like. Going back in with a little bit more color. Now down here at the base, there's going to be more color than in the middle, right? Because this has more light shining through it, assuming that it's outside. And you're also going to find in flowers in general, the middle will usually have some sort of veining. So you kind of want to hint that in there too. And then all I'm doing is going back in with a little color, giving an idea of where that goes. And then I'm blending it out. Again, today we're just using one color for the flower part. We'll use another color for the stem, but for the flower we will just use one color. Okay. So I'm going to take my little brush. I'm going to put a little bit of detail around the edge. Because flowers aren't perfect. And that's part of the reason that they're beautiful. So you want to get those kind of bent up edges. Now why didn't I just do this part first? Because you wanted this to kind of set a base for you. You wanted a little bit of a base color to know how dark you want to go at the top. And as it starts to dry, it'll shift colors too. And again, now I'm just bouncing my brush. Okay. And you're going to find the inside of a flower is much darker than the outside of a flower usually. And this particular flower we're painting, which if you notice we're just kind of making up our own tulip. And you can look at a photograph, you should. It'll give you something to go off of. But if you know something really, really well, or if you're just practicing with paint, sometimes it's better to not go off a photograph, and I will tell you why. Because people try to just copy a picture and get frustrated if it doesn't look identical to it. And there's something to be said for that. Great, you can copy a picture and you're going to get good enough one day, you can. But so what? Do you really want to copy a picture all the time? You want to copy an idea of the picture maybe, or the parts that you like of it. But you're more creative than that. Don't just copy. So now that we're just putting a little more color in, you can start to see the shape. And no one's going to know if it looks just like the tulip you were looking at, if you're looking at a photograph or an actual flower. But as long as you get the shape right, they'll know it's a tulip. And that's really what you're going for. Especially in the beginning of when you're doing watercolor, you don't have as much control as you're going to have later. And that's okay. Sometimes the water surprises you and does the right thing. And then as you learn to control it, you'll be able to do it on your own. And please keep in mind that this is all still the same color. And what you want to look at now is what's bending over what and what shapes are in front of the other. So in my opinion, this looks like it might actually come in front of this. So I'm going to darken this a little bit, because if it was in front, it would give a little shadow, right? And you can pick and choose what you do. You know, you can pick and choose what petals go where. Even if it's different from what you started with. That's okay. We're just going to keep it very simple. You don't even have to do all this extra detail. I want you to see where you can go with it. Okay. And this is fantastic for little greeting cards. I really recommend that the demo or the samples or whatever you want to call these that you're doing for yourself or you're doing as you follow along, they're wonderful for cards. Whether it's a birthday, whether it's a housewarming or Mother's Day, Happy Spring. People love getting hand-painted cards, you know? And even if it's not perfect, it's still a hand-painted card, and it makes it something special. Person will feel like you really put a lot of thought into it. Which I bet right now, you kind of are. Okay, we're just going to leave it simple like that. Now, the flower itself is one color, but we are going to put a stem in. So I'm going to put a little water down here. Stems should always be bent. So because my flower looks like it's bending this way a little, my stem is going to be bent this way. You don't ever want to do straight up and down. Straight up and down doesn't really exist in nature. Whatever green comes in your set you can use. If you want to use a little bit of blue, like I'm doing right now, you can put some blue in and add a little bit of yellow to it. I tend to like to mix colors. I think it makes it more interesting. And if it gets a little too yellow or a little too blue, just add the other one on top of it. But see how we have a pretty color shift right there? Okay. More than likely someone's going to recognize that as a tulip. If you want to give a little bit of background, you can. Do you have to? Absolutely not. Of course you don't have to. If you want to do part of another one down here, you can. But I think for today, we're just going to keep it simple and leave it like this. The only thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of dark right here.